in this problem, what we're supposed to do is we are supposed to find out the number of times a particular subsequence or substring is repeated in a given string. Okay, so to do that, first of all, you need to download these files and unzip it and then cd into this directory called DNA. After cding into this, I am going to create a file called dna.py and I'm going to write my code over here. So first of all, what we need to do here is we need to create a main function. You can do it without the main function, but just to be consistent with C programs, I am going to use this main function. So what do we need to do first? First of all, we need to extract the first argument or argv of 1. Okay, and then we are going to say that this is going to be our CSV path. Okay, so as you can see down here, the way we call this program is we use a database and we use a string or the txt file which contains that string. Okay, so we're going to use the CSV path and we're going to open it. So I'm going to use this Python speciality of opening a file, and I'm going to use this with open feature in Python. What this does is it closes the file if there is an error. So for example, what happens if I do it like this? What happens is this is like saying CSV file equals open CSV path. But the difference is that when I do this, and if there is any error, then before I call close on this, then what happens is that this file will be opened, will remain opened until we hit that close statement. But with this feature of Python, with using this with keyword, what we can do is we can write our code over here, and whenever there is an error that occurs, the Python interpreter, what it does is it closes this file so that there are no open files in our system. So this is a minor thing which you don't need to worry about it that much. You can do it either way, but I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to open this file, okay, and then I'm going to use CSV Reader. So I've imported my CSV module, and I'm going to use CSV.reader, and then I'm going to use CSV_file. Okay, this is the file handler, so to speak, or this is essentially what the result would be if I would have opened the CSV path name like this. Okay, so now CSV file needs to be read in by the CSV.reader module, and then we are going to get an object from this, and what this object enables us to do is we can now look at all the sequences. Okay, what CSV Reader is going to do is it's going to take in this file, okay, and then it's going to return an object, so that what we can do is now we can say for row in reader, and then we can, if we print row, and we are going to get all these lines one after the other. So to test that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say Python dna.py and see what happens is this reader, what it does is it gives me every single line of this file. Okay, one line at a time. I get all the rows inside my inside this row variable. So the first time row is going to be this guy, next time the row is going to be this guy, and so on and so forth. So now what we need to do is we want to eliminate this, the first line, okay, from, because this is a different sort of header than all these things, right? So this is a header, and all these things are sort of the what this is actually describing. Okay, so name is, all these are names, and all these are counts of AGATC. All these are, the second column is essentially going to be a count of this sequence, and so on and so forth. So what we need is, first of all, what we need to take all these sequences, and then we need to store it inside another variable. The reason being, we need to figure out the number of times AGATC, TTTTC, and all these sequences, the number of times each one of them repeats inside a bigger string, which is located inside sequences /5.txt. So we're going to open this file as well. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this thing out, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use argv of 2. So this is argv of 1, and this is going to be argv of 2. So argv of 2 is going to be our txt path. Txt path equals argv of 2. So now what we can do is we can use the same pattern, so to speak, of opening this txt path. So I'm going to say with open txt underscore path as txt file instead of csv file, and then this time around what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this txt file, not one row at a time, but I'm going to read in the entire string at once. So what this will do is if we print this out, we can see that we've got this entire string inside one variable s. So this is essentially a string which we have decided to call s. So now the next thing what we want to do is we want to figure out the maximum number of times that a particular substring repeats. Okay, so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a function. So I'm going to call get maximum length of a substring. Okay, and this is going to take in a string s, okay, a big string s, and a substring sub, okay, which is a smaller string. And what we want to do is we want to figure out the number of times, like this 80, 80, the number of times this is repeated, the maximum number of times this sequence which is inside sub is repeated. So I want to calculate the maximum, the length, or so sort of the maximum number of times a substring is repeated. Okay, so to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to use a particular kind of a logic, okay, for over here, in which we are saying, let's say my string is 80, something like this, and then what we're going to do is we are going to figure out the number of times, let's say 80. So if s is this guy and sub is simply 80, then I'm going to figure out the number of times 80 is repeating, or the maximum number of times 80 is repeating. Okay, so to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start an array. I'm going to create an array called answer, and what answer does is it stores exactly the number of times ending at this particular index, the number of times or starting at this particular index. So what I'm going to do is starting at this index, at that index, how many times is that substring, or the substring s, how many times does the substring s repeat, substring sub repeat in s. Okay, so to do that, what we are doing here is we are starting off. So there are many ways of doing it, okay, but the smartest way is to not recompute the answer again and again and again. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here and I'm going to say, okay, starting at a, okay, how many number of times do we have 80? Well, first of all, starting at t, we have sort of 0 number of times which we have 80 at, right? Starting at a, we have 1, because what we're going to do is we're going to say is starting here, and how many times do we have sort of 80 over here, which is sub. Okay, how many times do we have sub in this window? Then we are going to look here and we're going to say how many times do we have 80 in this window, and then it's going to be 0. And then we're going to say here is how many times do we have 80 repeated over here. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this index. We're going to look at this index, and we're going to increment this by 1, so we have 2. Okay, we're going to take whatever we have over here and we're going to increment it by 1. So this is going to be sort of the general case, and the easy case or the base case is going to be when it's sort of at the end. And if it's sort of at the end, we have nothing over here and that this is an 80, then we are going to essentially store 1 over here. Okay, cool. So let's code this up. This logic is a little tricky, but once you code this up, it might make a little bit more sense. Okay, so let's code this up. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to say for I in range, let me just close this. For I in range, I'm going to start at the end, right? I'm going to start over here. I'm just going to uncomment this once, and I'm going to say I'm going to start over here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I'm going to start from the end. So I'm going to start from length of s minus length of sub. Okay, so I'm going to start right over here in this case, and I'm going to go all the way till 0 or -1, not including -1, and I'm going to step down by -1. Okay, this is essentially like for int I equals 0, I less or int I equals length of s minus length of subs, and sterlen of s minus sterlen of sub minus sterlen of sub I greater than -1, I minus minus. So this is the same thing as this. Okay, so once you do this, what we're going to do is we're going to check if this string starting from the ith index, and we want to move forward and we want to look at this window, which is going to be the window starting at I, ending at I plus length of the substring. Okay, so if this guy equals the substring sub, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to check if this is the base case or not. So if this is the base case, which means if this is the simpler case, if basically if we are going outside of this bound, if I plus length of sub is greater than length of s minus 1, okay, because what we're doing is we're checking if we are sort of we're looking at outside these bounds. Okay, we're moving outside these bounds. Then what we are going to do here is we're going to set the answer variable. So I'm going to set basically create an answer variable, which is going to be starting at this index, how many times does the substring s repeat. Okay, so at every index I'm going to have the number of times that substring repeats. So if 80 is repeating 2 times consecutively over here, then this is going to be 2 over here, right? And then what I'm going to do is over here I'm going to see, you know what, 80 is just going to repeat 1 time over here. I'm going to have 1 over here, and so on and so forth. I'm going to have 2 over here, and I'm going to have 3 over here. Then finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the maximum in this array. So finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the maximum inside this answer variable to find out the maximum length, maximum number of times the substring is repeated. Okay, so yes, actually I should call this maximum number of times the substring is repeated. So I'm going to actually, this is the maximum length. Yeah, so repeated 3 times. Okay, so maximum number of times, the maximum number of times the substring is repeated. So yes, so 3 is the maximum number of times the substring is repeated. So then after doing this, so you know, I'm initializing this to all zeros, and the way to do that in Python is really easy. I'm going to say 0, and this multiplied operator is sort of has 2 meanings or many meanings in Python. It can mean multiplication, it can also mean, you know, creating an array starting with this 0 as one element, and the number of times it's repeated is the length of the string s. Okay, then after having done this, what we can do is you can set this to be 1, because if this is the base case, or sort of if this, we are looking at this index, okay, and we figure out that this is equal to 80, right? If this is equal to this equals to sub, then what we can do is I plus length of sub. If this guy plus this length of sub, which is going to be outside over here, is greater than, you know, this the last index, okay, then we know that this is the base case and the answer of I should be 1. Otherwise, what should happen is the answer of I should be whatever is at this index. So for example, over here, okay, if we're looking at this index, we figure out that this is 80, right? So what we're going to do is we are going to say, please look at this index, okay, because we need to figure out if there was the number of times this was repeated. 80 was repeated in this string, okay, string all the way starting from here all the way till the end, to figure out number of times that 80 is repeated over here, and if the number of whatever number of times it was repeated, we can add 1 to that, okay, and so on and so forth. So we add 1 over here and then we add 1 over here, so that now what we are going to do is the order of operation over here is going to be linear, right? Because we are just traversing the string just once. So the time complexity of this algorithm is going to be order of n. This is an order of n algorithm that we're using, and space is going to be order of the length of s. So order of length of s is going to be this time, and the order of length of s is going to be the space complexity. Time complexity. All right, let me just complete this. What's going to happen is it's going to be 1 plus whatever the answer was at I plus length of sub, okay. So this should work, and I'm going to comment all these things out. Again, this is a little tricky, so I'm going to repeat it once more. I've set all these elements to 0 initially, and then what I do is I look at this index and I say, if it so happens that I plus length of sub, which is this window, right? I'm looking at this window every single time, and if this window is 80, then what I do is I look if I'm looking at like sort of beyond this, if this is the like at the very end of this array, then I can simply put answer of I to be 1, because what answer stores is that starting at that index, how many times the string repeats, okay. Starting at this index, how many times the string repeats? 1 time, okay. Starting at this index, how many times the string repeats? Well, you look at this guy and then you just add 1 to it. So 1 plus 1 is going to be equal to 2 over here, right? So on and so forth. We fill this entire array and we return the maximum answer. And so now, having done that, what we do over here is we simply now need to call this function. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the CSV path, and we're going to use the reader to read in the CSV that is provided to us. So for example, over here, if you look at the CSV, we need all these we are given this string, right? And we have to figure out the number of times this is repeated, this is repeated, this is repeated, the maximum number of times this is repeated consecutively, okay? And then what we need to do is, anytime this entire thing matches, we know that the string that is given to us is probably of that particular individual. So what we're going to do is, so for example, we're going to calculate this, we're going to call this function, and we're going to calculate the number of times this is repeated, 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 and this is repeated, this is repeated, and this is repeated, and we're going to store it in one array. And we're going to match that array. We're going to call that this actual. So in the actual array, we're going to call this function, okay, maximum number of times substring is repeated. We're going to call this function again and again and again. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to call s and a sequence or a substring for all the sequences that we get from this thing, right? So we want to figure out, we need this. So how do we get that? Well, inside CSV Reader, there's a function called next, which actually, so initially what happens is that CSV Reader is actually going to give you a pointer to sort of the first line, and if you want the first line to point to the next line, sort of, if you want to skip one line, then you want to use the next keyword, okay, and then what you want to do is, or the next function, and what you want to do is you want to pass in this reader over here, okay, reader, and then what you do is you can store this. Once it moves to the next line, you have an option of this returns this entire line, okay, this entire line is returned. So you can say I want to store this entire line inside all sequences. So all sequences is going to have this first line, okay. So now what we want to do is we want to you don't want to include this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the starting from this index, the first index, all the way till the end of the array. I'm going to take all the elements and I'm going to store this inside all sequences. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take in every sequence from all sequences, and I'm going to calculate the maximum number of times the substring repeats consecutively inside this string s, which I'm going to get from this txt file, okay, which txt file which was over here. So I'm going to figure out maximum number of time every single string is repeated. So actually this is actually a shorthand for this. ARR equals this, and for, you know, num in some nums, ARR dot append num, okay. So instead of doing this, you could have done num for num in nums. So this is exactly the same. This is known as list comprehension in Python, which just shortens the code and sort of also increases readability, because this is just saying, instead of just initializing it to an empty array, we are initializing this using this list comprehension method in Python, which says, you know what, I need an array, and what I want to do is I want to get the answer. I'm going to iterate over all the sequences, and I'm going to get all these, the answer basically of every single sequence, the maximum number of times every single sequence repeats in this string, okay, and I'm going to store that in actual. So actually what I'm going to get back is an array which has numbers like this, okay. So now what we have to do is, after doing this, I have to basically say I'm going to match this actual array with my CSV reader. So whatever this is, I'm going to actually try to match whoever. I'm going to pass CSV reader inside this, and I'm going to also pass in the actual answer, okay, array. So I'm going to basically now iterate over the entire CSV file, and I'm going to figure out the person which has the exact same number of repetitions of ATCG consecutively, TTCT, and so on. I'm going to match this line with the actual, or all these lines I'm going to match with the actual array. And then whenever we have all these numbers which are equal, we have figured out that this is the person which is the person who has this DNA sequence, and we can print the person out. Otherwise, if we have iterated through all the names over here, and if we found that none of these names have this sequence or this answer, then we can return no match. So I'm going to define this function over here. Let's define print underscore match, and I'm going to take in a reader. So instead of, this is actually a reader, sorry, CSV reader is reader, okay. So reader, I'm going to take in a reader, and I'm also going to take in the actual array, okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for line in this reader, for every single line, what I'm going to do is, this is going to be a line in this array, this line, for example, I'm going to basically take only this line, so to speak. So to do that, I'm going to say, you know, this person. So I'm going to extract the person. So I'm going to extract the person by doing this. I'm going to say person equals line of 0, and what I'm looking at are the values. These values are going to be, so if you get a note, these are strings, so I need to convert each of them to integers. So to do that, I'm going to use the same list comprehension methodology over here. So I'm going to iterate over this line, the entire line. So I'm going to say for value of a val in line, and I'm going to substringify this. I'm going to say I'm going to start from the first index, and I'm going to get back all the values, and I'm going to take each value and I'm going to convert, and I'm going to store the integer value. So I'm going to convert this val into an integer, and I'm going to store that inside my values array. And then what I'm going to do is then simply I'm going to use this equality operator or equals operator, and inside Python what we don't need to do is we don't need to use the for loop to check for every single element, because this is actually in Python this operator actually checks equality based on the operators that it operates on. So this operator, if it is operating on two arrays, then it looks at the individual elements and compares every single element of this array to every single element of this array, and when they are equal, then this returns true. And if they are equal, I can print the person, and I'm going to return. Otherwise, if I have found no person which matches the actual array, I am going to return no match. Okay. Finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the main function like this. So this is actually a standard way of calling the main function in Python, which says if you're running the script directly without sort of importing it, so without you having to import these, if you're running this script, then what happens is there is a global variable called __name __, which is actually set to main. So don't need to worry about this too much. This is just a standard way of calling the main function. Now there's one thing that I've missed, which is I need to check if the argv, so before extracting 1 and 2 like this, I need to check if actually the length of argv, if it is equal to 3, then we are done. Okay, otherwise what we're going to do is we're going to print this usage thing over here, usage python dna.py data.csv and sequence.txt. all right, and I know that because of the documentation, and I'm going to basically return 1 or exit 1 in this case. Okay, this is similar to return 1 in C. All right, after having done this, let's just try to run this program once and see if we have an error over here. Well, this should be length. Let's run it again, and we have found the person to whom this DNA belongs to. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run check 50 on this. So to run check 50, what you do is you change this to check 50. Meanwhile, while this happens, I'm going to reiterate what's going on here. So first of all, what's going on here is, to summarize this once more, is I am first of all calculating. I'm just looking at the length of the argument vector, or the command number of elements that you've entered in the command line argument, and if they are 3, then it's okay. Otherwise, we are going to just return 1 or exit 1. Then what we're going to do is we're going to extract the CSV path. Okay, we can extract the CSV path, and what we're going to do is we can open up the CSV path as CSV file. So after doing that, we're going to use the reader, CSV Reader, to get to the sort of all these values which have sort of every single line. So this points to, if we use for row and reader, every row is going to point to a single line in the CSV file. So after that, so what we do is, first of all, we are going to use this first line, and we are storing all these values inside all sequences, and we're ignoring this name string. So that's why this 1 colon over here. Then after that, we are using argv of 2 argv of 2 contains the txt path, and with open txt path as txt file, what we can do is we're going to read the entire string over here. We're going to read this entire string, and then we're going to find out which the number of times, you know, from all these sequences, the number of times all these sequences, the maximum number of times they repeat consecutively inside the string s. Okay, we're going to take all these sequences and we're going to find basically all these numbers, okay, all these values. And having done that, we are going to now match this actual value with all these lines. We're going to first check equality for this line, then the next line, then the next line, and so on and so forth. And if they match, we're going to do that. We're going to print that match, otherwise we're going to print no match. Okay, as you can see, we've got all correct. So that's pretty much it. You know, once I'm going to show what happens with print match, I'm just looking at all the lines, and I'm looking at all the values, and if they are equal to the actual array that has been returned by this function, okay, by this guy, I'm sending this actual array over here. This is parameter. If it matches with the values that I get, then I'm printing that person. Otherwise, I'm returning from this function. I'm printing that function. I'm returning from this function. Otherwise, if there is no person who matches the actual array, I'm going to print no match. This is the tricky part. What happens over here is, finally, this part is actually we're going to get the maximum number of times the substring is repeated. To do that, I'm going to start off over here. In this case, let's say this is the example of this is my string and this is my substring. I'm going to create an array of the same size of the length of s, and I want to check if this is equal to 80. I'm going to look at this window. Okay, what this does is it looks at a window of size 2 in this case, or whatever the length of sub is going to be. So I'm going to look at the window of size length of sub, and I'm going to check if it's equal. Then I'm going to say, you know what, whatever the value was at you know, one more than, sort of, if I'm here, I'm going to look at this guy and I'm going to see if this whatever's over here, I'm going to just increment it by 1, because I know that the number of times, for example, if I'm over here, then I'm going to look at this guy and I'm going to say, you know, this is 80, and whatever this value is going to be, I can increment that by 1, which is happening over here. Otherwise, if I'm at the end of this end of the string, I'm checking at the end of the string, I'm looking at the end of the string, and looking beyond this string, then I know that the answer is going to be 1. Okay, because what this answer variable stores is starting at this index, how many times the substring sub is repeated in s. Okay, then I'm going to essentially find the maximum over here. So the maximum number of times this substring is repeated. So that's pretty much it. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace.